Welcome to the virtual 2021 California Assessment Conference, brought to you by the California Department of Education. This year's conference theme is Together is Better, capitalizing on the collective knowledge and experience of the California assessment community. So sit back, enjoy this session, and explore the world of student assessment.
Hi, my name is Lisa Clark from the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools office.
And I'm Sandy Cahill from the Tulare County Office of Education.
Welcome to our 101 session on the English Language Proficiency Assessments for California, or the ELPAC. This session is designed as an introductory session to highlight some basic information about the ELPAC. Before we jump in, we want to point out that the word assessments in ELPAC is plural. That will be an important detail as we go through this presentation. Let's start with the learning goals for this session. By the end of our time together, educators will understand the structure of the ELPAC and some nuts and bolts about the assessment, the differences between the initial ELPAC and the summative ELPAC, ELPAC scores and performance levels and how they connect to classroom instruction, and various ELPAC resources available to connect to classroom instruction. We will know we have met our learning goals when viewers meet our success criteria. By the end of our time together, educators will be able to describe the differences and similarities between the initial ELPAC and the summative ELPAC, describe how educators might use ELPAC performance levels and ELPAC scores to reflect on current practice and implications in the classroom, and identify ELPAC resources available to use in the classroom. Let's quickly run through some facts about English learners, or ELs. For this, we will use the handy-dandy fact fairy to help us with some facts. Let's start with fact number 1, which is that there are close to 1.2 million ELs in California schools. That comes out to about 20% of the total California public school enrollment. Fact fairy number 2 says, when we add in students who have been reclassified as fluent English proficient, the number of English learner students in California jumps to 2.4 million. That comes out to about 41% of the total California public school enrollment. Let's pause for a second and let those numbers sink in. Fact number 3 says, of the 1.2 million current ELs, about 840,000 of them are kindergarten through 6th graders, which leaves 360,000 in 7th through 12th grade. And fact fairy number 4, the last one before we move on, says, the vast majority of ELs speak Spanish as their primary language. That is just over 80%. The top 3 languages spoken by California families, in case you're wondering, are Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. We're now going to move on and cover some basic nuts and bolts about the ELPAC. The ELPAC consists of 2 separate assessments, the initial ELPAC and the summative ELPAC. Remember how we said the word assessments was plural in the ELPAC acronym? This is why. We use cute little alpacas, or ELPAC-as, as we like to call them, to talk about the different tests, and you will see why in the next few slides. Both the initial ELPAC and the summative ELPAC are aligned with California's 2012 English Language Development, or ELD standards. And both parts of the ELPAC assess the same 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But we have the initial ELPAC as a smaller alpaca to show it's a screener, and the summative ELPAC as a larger alpaca to show it's a full summative assessment. It is important to note that there is not a comparison between the initial ELPAC and the summative ELPAC. They are 2 different assessments with very different purposes. Let's talk about who takes each assessment and why. First up is the initial ELPAC. The initial ELPAC is a screener, which means it is shorter than the summative ELPAC. Remember the small alpaca? It is intended to determine initial English proficiency. Eligibility for the initial ELPAC is based on the results of the home language survey. The home language survey is given only once when a student is first enrolled in a California school. If the home language survey has a language other than English listed, the initial ELPAC is to be administered. Once it is determined that the initial ELPAC will be administered to a student, it must be done within 30 days of enrollment in a California public school. Please note that LEAs have to notify parents of testing, administer the initial ELPAC, and provide results to parents or guardians, all within those 30 days. Let's recap. So what about the summative ELPAC? Who takes this one and why? The initial ELPAC will give students one of two classifications: initially fluent in English or English learner. The summative ELPAC is administered only to English learners to gauge their English language proficiency progress. This is not a screener, but a full summative assessment. Remember the larger ELPAC? It is administered annually until students meet reclassification criteria. So when do students take the ELPAC? The window for the initial ELPAC is July 1st through June 30th. Remember from the earlier slide that you will administer the initial within 30 days of eligible students enrolling at your school. The window for the initial ELPAC is July 1st through June 30th. Remember from the earlier slide that you will administer the initial within 30 days of an eligible student enrolling at your school. That 30-day window can happen at any point in the year, depending on when students enroll. The window for the summative ELPAC is February 1st through May 31st. If a student enters your school and is eligible to take the initial ELPAC, and they are found to be an English learner, they will also take the summative ELPAC, even if both assessments are administered within the same month. An important note of clarification is that the first day of enrollment is the first day that a student is in school. Students can be pre-enrolled in the summer, but day one of the 30-day requirement starts when a student begins school. So how do students take the ELPAC? The initial ELPAC is a computer-based assessment. The initial ELPAC is available at 6 grade levels or grade spans: kindergarten, first, second, grades 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. Please note that for both assessments, transitional kindergarten students are tested on the kindergarten assessment. To clarify, transitional kindergarten is defined as year 1 of a 2-year kindergarten program. Students are tested one-on-one in grades K through 2 on the computer, and in small groups of up to 20 students for grades 3 through 12. As always, the speaking domain is administered individually for all grade levels. Administration and scoring for the initial ELPAC is a little different now that it is computer-based. Scores must now be entered into the Data Entry Interface, or DEI. Before a student can be tested, an SSID number must be generated. Listening and reading domains for all grades will be scored automatically in the test delivery system. For speaking, test examiners score student responses using rubrics and enter their scores into the Data Entry Interface. They can do this as the student is being tested, or they can record their scores on a student score sheet to be entered into the DEI at the end of the test session. For writing, scoring depends on the grade level. Test examiners will use the teacher's hand scoring system, or THSS, to score grades 3 through 12 writing. This system allows them to view the response and enter a score by using the rubric, which is available in the THSS. Test examiners will enter K2 student writing responses in the Data Entry Interface, since the students write those responses in their answer books. Another important thing to note about the initial ELPAC is that it is an untimed assessment. Students can take as long as they need to complete the assessment. If you are an ELPAC coordinator, one positive change is that the English Language Acquisition Status, or ELAS, now feeds CalPADS from the Test Operations Management System, or TOMS, on a daily basis, so LEAs will no longer need to update this manually in CalPADS. What about the summative ELPAC? How is that administered? The summative ELPAC is computer-based with some exceptions. In kindergarten through grade 2, the writing domain is paper-pencil. The administration for both assessments is the same, meaning individual for K2 and small groups for grades 3-12. The same systems are used for scoring, both the data entry interface and the teacher hand scoring system. The summative ELPAC is available at 7 grade levels or grade spans: kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, grades 3-5, 6-8, grades 9-10, and grades 11-12. For both the initial and summative ELPACs, test examiners will also have access to a tool called TRACS, which stands for Technology Readiness Checker for Students. You can locate this tool on the homepage of the ELPAC website. This optional tool helps determine if the student is able to interact with the computer-based assessment or if they need assistance. Just like the initial ELPAC, the summative ELPAC is an untimed assessment, so students can take as long as they need to complete it.
Let's now talk about how scores are reported on the initial and summative ELPAC. We will discuss the performance levels and how they relate to the ELD standards and proficiency level descriptors. Scores are reported slightly differently for the initial versus the summative assessments. For the initial assessment, results are reported at 3 performance levels, as the assessment is not long enough to support 4 levels. The 3 levels are Novice English Learner, Intermediate English Learner, Initial Fluent English Proficient. For the summative assessment, there are 4 performance levels, which are Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, Level 4. While there are 4 levels for the summative ELPAC, there are 3 proficiency levels defined in the 2012 California English Language Development, or ELD, standards. Let's walk through how these line up. The emerging level of the ELD standards lines up to Level 1 of the ELPAC. The expanding level of the ELD standards lines up to Level 2 and half of Level 3 of the ELPAC. The bridging level of the ELD standards lines up to upper Level 3 and Level 4 of the ELPAC. We're now going to engage in an activity to help you better understand performance levels for the ELPAC in relation to the ELD standards. Take a moment and please find the following 2 documents in your materials: ELPAC General Performance Level Descriptors, ELD Proficiency Level Descriptors. Take 6 minutes to read the ELPAC Performance Level Descriptors for levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and the ELD Proficiency Level Descriptors for emerging, expanding, and bridging. List some keywords and phrases. What are some connections that you see between the 2 documents? We're going to close our discussion of ELPAC scores with a comment about using the ELPAC as part of reclassification. The State Board of Education approved the use of ELPAC Overall Performance Level 4 as the statewide standardized reclassification criterion beginning with the 2018-19 summative ELPAC administration for grades K through 12. Therefore, LEAs shall use overall proficiency level 4 to determine whether a student has met the English language proficiency assessment criterion. All other reclassification criteria remain locally determined. Per the state education code, Any local reclassification procedures must be reviewed by the School District Advisory Committee on Programs and Services for English Learners. It's important to mention that there are other criteria: teacher evaluation, parent consultation, and an assessment of basic skills. Any beyond those are locally determined. Please note that the CDE has recommended reclassification criteria that is posted on the CDE's reclassification webpage, but LEAs have the flexibility to locally determine their reclassification criteria. Let's now move on to our next topic, which involves development of the alternative ELPAC for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Due to COVID, the alternate ELPAC testing window will be November 1st, 2021 through February 15th, 2022. Please note that this is a census field test, which means that all eligible students in California are expected to participate. The State Board of Education approved several recommendations for the alternate ELPAC. First and foremost, it's important to keep in mind that this assessment is only for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. It should be administered in grades and grade spans that are consistent with the initial ELPAC, grades kindergarten, first, second, grades 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and high school. These are the grades and grade span for the field test. After that, the high school spans will be 9 through 10 and 11 through 12. The assessment will be administered one-on-one for all students by a test examiner who is very familiar with the student's preferred communication mode. The assessment will include accessibility resources, including universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. The accessibility framework will resemble that of the California alternate assessments to complement one-on-one administration. Constructed response items will be scored locally, similar to other California alternate assessments. The test form will be the same for both initial and summative tests for the first year. Unique items will be incorporated into initial and summative in the coming administrations. The assessment will offer integrated task types that measure a student's ability to communicate in English using individually preferred communication modes. Future administrations will see some unique items in initial and summative. The number of unique items will increase over time. With input from experts and stakeholders, the state has approved 3 general performance level descriptors for the alternate ELPAC. Multiple stakeholder groups were consulted to inform the descriptors for each performance level, including members of the ELPAC Technical Advisory Group, California educators, and the statewide assessment stakeholders. These 3 performance levels are consistent with other CASP alternate assessments. They describe both the level of English language proficiency as well as the linguistic support needed by a student at that level of English proficiency. Let's move on to our final section, where we're going to briefly highlight some resources available to support your understanding and administration of the ELPAC. There are other resources available to support your work with student assessments. There are also fact sheets and domain information sheets available to support educators in better understanding the ELPAC. There are fact sheets for both the initial and the summative ELPAC assessments. There are also domain information sheets that highlight the task types associated with each domain. Links to these documents are also in the links handout. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed it and found the information useful. Remember, together is better. Capitalizing on the collective knowledge and experience of the California assessment community.